Okay, hi everyone again. Welcome to today's webinar on raster types in GIS Cloud. Specifically, we have a new feature we've recently released, a single band raster, and we're very excited to show you what you can do with it. My name is Barbara, and I'm a customer success manager here at GIS Cloud, and I'll be taking you through today's webinar. Okay, so let's get started. Let's see what our agenda for today looks like. First of all, we will see what you could actually do with raster in GIS Cloud previously, and also how it was used by some of our clients. We'll then see what's new and what new improvements we've made, and also what new opportunities this brings. Of course, we always like to show you new things in action, so we'll go over a quick live demo as well, so no worries. As always, we very much look forward to hearing from you. So in the end, we'll have a short Q&A session. So feel free to send any questions that you might have. There's a Q&A box in this Zoom webinar meeting, so feel free to send it there, or also you can do so through the chat. Okay, but before we actually get started, a quick question for you guys. Do you use any kind of raster in your workflow? We have a little poll made here, so let me just launch that. So you'll have a few seconds to answer. Of course, you don't have to if you don't want to, but it is completely anonymous. So we would love to see what your experience with raster is up until now, so that we can see what kind of public we're dealing with here. And that's great. I can see actually that most of you are using raster in some shape or form. I can actually share the results with you so that you can see it. And yeah, I guess everyone is working with raster, so that's great. So maybe not much new here, but maybe there was also someone who didn't answer. So for those of you who might be new to raster, but are interested in its potential use, here's just a quick introduction. So what is raster? Raster is a method or a way of storing spatial data where the actual area forms a grid of some sorts, grid of cells or pixels, and they each have a certain value or an attribute. And this value can be really anything from elevation, temperature, if you have some kind of index value, type of land, whatever. Usually we get this raster data either from satellite imagery, from pictures, from drone imagery, things like that. Data stored as a raster, it's often used as additional data to provide some kind of context. For example, you might want to have like a base map underneath your vector layers. But of course, it's also an incredible tool for a lot of different geospatial analysis. So GIS Cloud has actually always supported different raster file types. And most of our users do use raster in some shape or form. As you can see from the poll that we have, you're all using something. Even if you don't have actually raster layers on your map, you're probably having like pictures that you attach to vectors. So those are also rasters, but I think that's maybe a different webinar altogether. However, previously with raster in GIS Cloud, you were a little bit limited because you only could use multi-band raster files, and specifically those would be 3-band RGB or RGBA, because you also had that transparency layer band that you could use. So to clarify for anyone that might be new to raster, so any raster can have one band, we call those single bands, and that's what our main focus today will be. Or they can have several different bands as well. We call those multi-band raster. And you can think of those bands as sort of layers, and these different types also serve different purposes. So sometimes you might use multi-band, sometimes single band, depending on what your kind of end goal is and what your data looks like. So we mentioned you used to be able to use only multi-band in GIS Cloud. Usually when we think of that, that's kind of base map RGB, as you can see here on the right, that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. So some kind of aerial photography or satellite imagery. These kinds of base maps provide sort of a background layer for a lot of different data and uses, anything from monitoring crops, monitoring construction sites, managing vegetation or new developments, really anywhere where you actually need to have a detailed image of what's actually going on the ground. You could use just a regular satellite base map that we also offer through our map editor, anything like OpenStreet or Bing or Mapbox or anything like that. But those usually cover the whole world. So chances are that the area that you really need won't be always up to date. Things change very quickly today. And there's also the question of resolution. So if you have your own imagery, that's usually a better resolution than what you can get with just kind of available base maps that are out there. One of the kind of common places that we see the use of these kinds of RGB files specifically is when, let's say, project managers who are working on a site in the field, they want to share their progress with maybe project managers or anything like that. They're keen to share these larger raster files with clients because our map viewer can then also serve as a very simple interface that even non-GIS users can use. And of course, they allow you to then add more data to it if you have some kind of vector data and add that to that. Raster can also be used for different things like surface maps or thematic maps. So it's not just a simple RGB base map. And a very common example of, let's say, surface map would be things like elevation maps or DEM, so digital elevation model, population density, temperature maps, or for thematic maps, that can be something like vegetation or land cover classification. And you can see an example of one classified raster here on the right as well. So what actually changed? You can see that the raster that's used for these types of maps, so thematic and surface maps, this is actually usually a single band raster. And now by extending support for this type of raster, you can create those maps directly in GIS Cloud. Before you could do kind of a workaround where you exported your data as multiband, but this really makes it a lot more streamlined and very simple to use. So what's exactly included in this new edition? Well, apart from just being able to recognize and visualize single band rasters at all, you can now choose exactly how you want to visualize them. So the main two options that we have would be between classified and stretch methods, where the classified one will give you distinct classes. So something like we see here on the right. And with the stretch method, your layer will be visualized as sort of a gradient of your color ramp. So all of the color values that you have in the gradient will be present, and the data then simply kind of stretches to fit with that gradient. You can even choose these visualization options when you're working with multi-band layers. So you can just choose one of those bands to be your single band of choice. Of course, we'll see all of that in action because that's kind of always the best way for you to imagine what you can do. So enough theory for now. Let's take a look at this in practice. Let me just switch over to our map. For those of you that might be new, this is our map editor application. So it's our main GIS tool where you can upload and manage your data, where you can create maps, share projects, and in general, perform all of the kind of essential GIS functions that you might need. So I already have a map prepared here, and I've uploaded the file because you can work with very large files, so we don't want to kind of waste our time on that. But we will be preparing the layer together. So one thing to note, in general, GIS Cloud supports a number of different formats for raster. You can find the full list in our manual. Today, we're mostly working with just simple TIFF files. So single band rasters are not actually visible on the map by default. So you can see here, my layer here, single band raster. We can't actually see it yet on the map. First, we need to define what kind of visualization we want to use. So let's go ahead and let's do that. Of course, in this first part in the layer properties, you can see kind of the general information, but this style tab is kind of where the magic happens if you don't hate that cliche too much. First thing you'll see is that our render type here was selected by default. So this is in fact a single band raster. So the system automatically recognized it as such. But if you are working with multi-band rasters, it will simply say multi-band here, which you can then change to single band. So if you have a single band, that's all you can do. But if you have a multi-band, you can then either go with the multi-band option or the single band. But today, of course, we're focusing on the single bands. Let's see how we can style them. So you can kind of go and manually add the different classes and define the range of values. So what the value for pixels will be for each of these groups. But of course, we do have this classification wizard here, which will make things a lot simpler for you. And of course, this is kind of the best place to start. You can always edit this a bit later on if you want to adjust the classes, but we'll go over that in just a second. So you can choose, first of all, the rendering method of your choice. You can choose classified or stretched. Let's start with the stretched one just to start with. They are a bit different. So with the classified one, you are getting distinct classes. So you'll have a set number of classes that you're working with, and all of the values will kind of fit within those classes. But if you're working with the stretch method, then all of the values that you have will kind of be stretched to this particular color ramp of your choosing, this gradient, and you'll see all of the values present. So this is if you're working with continuous values, let's say digital elevation or maybe temperatures, things like that. They're kind of continuous. They're very good to use with a stretch method. There's a couple of different methods that you can choose here for stretched. Each of these is explained in more detail in our manual. Of course, this will always depend on what kind of data you have. So the choice of the method will always depend on your data and also what you're trying to show with it. So this is kind of as much art as it is science, but if you are working with a specific data set, you can always, look online and see what the best method for that would be. For now, I'll just leave this as none, and you can also choose a color ramp of your choosing. I'll stick with grayscale for now. You can also invert these colors. So for instance, now if I use this this particular color ramp, my oceans will actually be darker and my continents will be lighter. If I want to switch this around, I can just click on invert. Okay, so let's see how our stretch method looks like. It takes a few seconds depending on how large your data set is. This one covers the whole world, so it's going to take a few seconds, but nothing we can't wait. And there we go. So now we've defined how we want our single band raster layer to look like, and it's visualized exactly like that. You can see, for example, the higher areas here, all of the mountains, they're kind of lighter, and of course, the lower areas here are darker. So you can see with the stretch method, you have the full gradient actually visible here. But what I'll show you next is how we can actually take the same data and apply the classified method and have a bit of a different result to our data. Of course, this is just a simple elevation, so this might be a perfectly fine option. But if you want to maybe separate these different elevations into classes, you can use the classified method here. And for this, I'll also use a different color ramp, a different gradient, because this is what's kind of typically used for these kinds of information. You can also choose what range you want to classify, if you want to maybe remove some of the end values, and of course, you can define how many classes you want to include. So let's say maybe 7. We can, of course, always go back to this and make adjustments. And all we do is click on classify, and the system automatically generates 7 different classes for us. They're kind of equally distributed. And of course, you can always go back to this and you can make changes to it. You can adjust the different ranges, the different classes based on your data. Not every time the kind of default value will work perfectly with your data set, but you'll have to take this, of course, with a grain of salt. For all of these classes, you can, of course, also change the labels. For example, we might have here something like deep oceans, maybe shallow oceans, plains or flats, and maybe this last one would be something like very high mountains or something like that. So I'll just change the label on just the first one and the last one, just so you can see how this looks like. Deep ocean. And we can save this classification and see how our layer looks like. Again, it just takes a few seconds depending on your file size, and we'll see this change reflected, of course, on the map. You can see it here. And of course, in our layer list, where we have for those classes where we defined the labels, we have that written. And for those where we haven't defined it, we just have the range itself. But very simple, very quick tool for you to make changes to the data depending on what you want to show. So this would be a great maybe base map for something. But what I also want to show you is we have also one more layer that we've prepared before to give you, of course, one more example, because this is just an elevation one. You might be working with, of course, lots of different data sets, whether it's in agriculture or construction or forestry or vegetation management, so different industries. So I want to give you a couple of more examples as well. So we'll take a look at our light pollution layer here. And let's just turn off this bottom one for now. For example, you can see we have one more single band raster layer here, which we've again defined different classes for. And this one actually shows you the different pollution levels, light pollution levels in different cities. And what's great is because you have, of course, the option to add multiple layers here because it is a GIS tool, and you can very easily then do your own analysis. So for example, if I lower the transparency just a little bit, you can see how our light pollution fits nicely with all of the big cities that we have here in this part of Europe. So that's also something you can take into consideration. So if you have your own rasters, whether that's a single band or a multi-band, you can always see more and gain more information just by having those. And to show you even further that you can then combine these different rasters together, if I turn on my elevation level that I had before, you can actually see that these cities and these light pollution areas actually correspond nicely with the kind of lower areas for lower elevation areas, because usually, at least in this part of Europe, big cities are always in kind of the flat parts of the countries. Okay, of course, this is just one of many, many different examples that you can have. Our clients use Raster in really a range of different industries, like we mentioned, agriculture, where you can maybe monitor crops, monitor the health. If you are working with any kind of vegetation indices, to monitor everything in utilities. If you want to have like a base map layer where you can see exactly the very detailed, very high resolution portions of the areas that you are working with, maybe adding some cables, electric utilities, pipes, etc. In things like forestry or vegetation management, where you want to see exactly what's actually in the real world. That's of course very useful. Really, any industry where you need to either have a very accurate and up-to-date imagery from the field, of course, or where you want to kind of show this information in a thematic way. So something like these light pollution or the elevation map that we have over here. And that's, of course, great, because since everything that you have here is online, you can then, of course, very easily share this with other users, whether that's maybe a client or a colleague or whoever needs to see this information. So you see how very simple it is. Now, before we actually move on to your questions, before we actually leave you to do your own thing with the with this new and improved feature, we have one final question for you. So do you have, let me just stop sharing this one and let me add a new poll. One final question for you. So do you have any raster data that you would like to display thematically? Maybe something like this, where you have elevation. Okay, so it's 50-50. So I'm guessing that those of you who are primarily said no, you mostly, I guess, use RGB base maps, essentially RGB rasters that just display exactly how it is. Okay, so let me show you the results of the poll. So actually, just a portion of you do work with single band raster, but perhaps that's because you weren't able to do so until now in GIS Cloud. So maybe this will motivate you to make more thematic maps. Okay, I think this is a very good place to start with our Q&A session. So let's see what kind of questions you guys have. Okay, I can see there's plenty to work with. Let's see. What file types do you support? So as we mentioned, we support a number of different ones. Off the top of my head, TIFF files, JPEGs, PNGs, ECWs, JP2, so JPEG 2000. So a lot of different files, but always check our manual, because you'll have the most kind of up-to-date information there regarding the different file types. Okay, let's see more. Do you support raster mosaic? Yes, we do. So you can very easily add multiple different files, raster files, as just one layer in the form of kind of a raster mosaic. Can you georeference rasters in GIS Cloud? No, at the moment, no. So all of the rasters that you upload into GIS Cloud, for now, they need to be georeferenced before. So make sure that if you have a raster that has like an accompanying file that has the spatial reference, make sure to upload them both. Okay, what's the difference between range and label when you're seeing the classes? The difference is that the range actually defines which values will be in a certain class. So let's say 0 to 10 is one class, 10 to 20 is another class, 20 to 50 is a third class, and so on and so on. And the label can be pretty much the same if you just want to leave it as a numerical value, or if you want to maybe further explain what this actually means, because not every time the actual values will be something that is kind of easily understandable, easily recognizable. Maybe you're classifying a raster that's shows vegetation indices. So that's not really something that is very as understandable as maybe elevation. So 100 meters, 1,000 meters, etc. Okay, can you remove the black edge? Yes, you can. So you have an option to set what value is set as no data, and that will remove the black edge for you. Is it possible to have the legend inside the map? Yes, so the layer list is always there. You can turn it off if you want to. You can turn it on to have it visible. If you're working with maybe a custom application, so if you want to, let's say, customize a viewer that you're sharing with a client, you can then even fully remove it or make it so that it always shows. So lots to do with the legend and the app customization in general, but app customization is definitely a webinar in itself. We have a great video on that topic if you want to take a look at it. Will there be a recording? Yes, there will be. So it will be published probably tomorrow, which you can see on our blog later. Okay, can you set any value to be transparent? Otherwise, how do you deal with transparent areas of the geotiff? Usually the edges. So you can, if you remember, you were able to kind of not remove certain values from being shown on the map. If you just remove the kind of edge values of a particular raster file, then those won't be shown on the map. But it's not possible currently to set a class as transparent. You can just not have the class present for that particular value. Is it possible to include rasters of a specific area or just global rasters? Yes, definitely possible to just have a raster that covers a very small area. What we've shown today was one that covers kind of the whole globe, simply because it's kind of very effective in showing you how it looks like, but definitely it can be a very small area that you want to show. Is it possible to change the output format? Yes, you have that option in our render tab. Can I upload large raster files? Yes, you can. There is a size limit to uploading kind of directly through the map editor. So if you either drag and drop or click on upload over there, but larger files than 500 megabytes can be then uploaded through SFTP. So if it's bigger than that, just upload it through SFTP and that will cover that. Actually, a great kind of follow-up question to that. Do you have any storage restrictions? Yes. Each license that we have does have a certain storage restriction, but it's definitely something that you can increase if needed. Okay, can you choose to classify multi-band layer? Yes, so all you need to do is choose, instead of multi-band, the single band as the render option. So it will allow you to do so. If you recall, with the single band, you weren't able to switch that option because you can't have a multi-band from a single band, but the other way around works. Can I share the raster with others? Yes, of course. Any map that you create in GIS Cloud, you can share this with other users. If it's private, they just need to have an account. If it's public, you can share this either as an embedded map, or you can make a map portal. Plenty of options. So if you're not sure how to set it up, you can always reach out to us and we can help you with the kind of setup. And let's have a final question. What subscription do you need to use this module? This is actually included in the map editor application. So if you have a map editor subscription, you will be able to use this. So as we mentioned, the only kind of, let's say, restriction would be on your storage, but that's also something you can expand if needed. But also, there are plenty of situations where your raster file might actually be just small enough so that you don't even need that. So definitely try it out. Let us know if you have any questions, if you would like us to maybe go with you through the setup, and we can help you out there. Okay, so we just have one final question that actually says thank you. So thank you, whoever wrote that. And thank you all for joining today's webinar. It was short but concise, and I hope you liked it. Definitely check out the single band raster feature that we implemented. Try it out with your own data. And we look forward to hearing your feedback on that. Okay, thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.